Hi everybody, it's Kimberly Ballard here from my channel Elijah and Moses. Welcome to my channel. Periodically I keep you updated about the Bethsaida dig, the home of Simon Peter, Andrew his brother, and Philip. So I wanted to give you an update because there was a wildfire situation that happened. And I'll give you this story because I think it's really incredible. Wildfire unveils lost biblical village of Bethsaida. The fire that scorched the Bethsaida Nature Reserve exposed mounds all over the El-Araj dig. These were the homes of Bethsaida, archaeologists say, and there was a public building too. Ruins of homes appear amid the ash after the El-Araj burned. A wildfire along the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee in late July endangered bathers, shut down Highway 87 in both directions, and as the lakeside vegetation burned to a crisp, unveiled the missing town of Bethsaida. This has got to be God's divine plan. It isn't that the ancient homes had been covered with foliage only to be suddenly revealed as 2,000-year-old stone walls when the flames engulfed them. The village from the time of Jesus was and remains buried in the sands of time, and now ash as well. But bared by the conflagration that consumed the Bethsaida Nature Reserve, small mounds are now exposed, scattered all over the archaeological site of El-Araj, sprawling over hundreds of meters. They're like mini tells, and a tell is a mound, and it usually has archaeological artifacts buried within. Each is an ancient room, predicts Mordecai Aviam, archaeological director of the excavation. Small mounds attest to buildings below the scorched earth at El-Araj. Archaeologists find entreaty to St. Peter in early church by the Sea of Galilee. The excavation of El-Araj began in 2016 with permission from the Nature and Parks Authority that manages the reserve. Following an epiphany, Etel, an ancient city a mile to the north, formerly recognized as Bethsaida, was impressive, but it couldn't have been the humble fishing village described by Scripture and Josephus. Etel is too high in elevation and too far from the lake, and it is contended archaeologist Rami Arav proposes it to be the Iron Age capital of biblical Geshur, and he also contends that it was Bethsaida, which it's not. El-Araj, by contrast, sits in the appropriate location along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and has been proven to have ruins and fishing gear from the 1st century, the time of Jesus. So far, the excavation at El-Araj has exposed a Byzantine church monastery from the 5th century over which Crusaders accidentally built a sugar factory in the 12th or 13th century, and some walls from earlier centuries. But the residential sections of the sprawling 1st century fishing village that King Herod Philip would upgrade into the city of Julius had remained elusive until now. The fire consumed all life above ground in the area and enabled Aviam and his team to do something they could never do before: survey the naked land around the church at El-Araj. The fire started near Amnon Beach. 11 firefighting teams from Tiberias in the region, aided by 6 planes and all-terrain vehicles from nearby villages, battled the blaze for more than 17 hours before extinguishing the last flames on Shabbat afternoon. As the archaeologists walked over the carbonized land on the following Sunday, smoke was still rising from isolated hotspots. A week after the fire and a day after the impromptu survey, the blackened earth crunches under our feet, charred boughs crumbling to ash underfoot as Aviam points out mounds and sooty archaeological pieces, blocks, and a pillar drum. This wasn't only a residential area. This drum means that there had been a public building here, he says. The breeze dilutes the smell of smoke, Green blades are already shooting forth from the roots of reeds that survived underneath. Life always finds a way, though the eucalyptuses that once shaded the dig are irreversibly dead. Rich in the oil exploited for aromatic ointments and candles, their hearts burned fiercely and were gutted. On Tuesday, mid-excavation, officials arrived to inspect and saw down the cellulose cadavers, which posed a danger to the team. I wanted to tell you, when I saw this picture of this gutted eucalyptus tree, it looked exactly like a tree that was in my dream years ago, and it had to do with the rapture. It was real strange, but I was standing at it was a party of some sort in a room, in a ballroom, and all of a sudden this tree came down and it was on fire inside the tree. And as we stood there, the cloud came down, and in the midst of the tree and the fire, and the cloud spread out on the floor, and I was aware that it was encompassing me and my feet and the rest of us that were there. And I just knew that the rapture was happening. So when I saw this burned out eucalyptus tree, it was exactly that shape. So it kind of shocked me. Within days of the fire in late July, reeds began to regenerate. Now in its 9th excavation season, the El-Araj project, led by Aviam of Kinneret College as archaeological director and R. Stephen Notley, Dean of Religious Studies at Pillar College, Newark, as historical director, is in hot pursuit of the Roman layer from the time of Jesus, Simon Peter, and the apostles. The Roman layer lies deep under the Byzantine layer, which in turn lies below the Crusader sugar factory. The volunteers are industriously unearthing and documenting the Crusader and Byzantine walls before removing them to dig deeper. That is archaeology. To reach a lower, older layer, everything above it must be destroyed. Aviam is confident that a Roman layer exists, partly because fragments of Roman pottery keep appearing, but mainly because in previous seasons they found the ruins of a Roman bathhouse, a hallmark of Roman cities. And now the fire has conveniently suggested where they can dig for homes in future seasons. The church is spared. How did the location of Bethsaida, hometown of the apostles Simon Peter, Andrew, and Philip, according to the New Testament, get lost in the first place? Like most of the other sites around the Sea of Galilee associated with Jesus, it fell into ruin during the upheavals during and after the Roman era and was forgotten. Over time, as the lake's water rose and fell, the ruins silted over and disappeared until probably someone near Amnon Beach dropped a cigarette and didn't stamp it out. Inexplicably, the flames came right up to the tarp covering the apse of the church and stopped. Can you believe that? It is true that the vegetation immediately around the excavation had been cleared, but the blaze could easily have leapt over the insignificant gap. Yet the early church and its canvas coverings were spared, so the flames came right up to the Byzantine apse of the church and stopped. That is a God thing. Okay, in this picture, the church is at the bottom left. Note how the fire reaches the apse but does not enter the church. The shipping container housing the excavation equipment was not. How hot was the fire? The team's wheelbarrows melted. The team soldiered on nonetheless, sharing one wheeled survivor, and the excitement stayed high even as the temperatures did too. Digging starts at 6 a.m. on the dot. As the sun rises in mid-morning and approaches, the heat is pushing over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. When important discoveries are made, a bell is rung and everybody wipes the sweat off their eyes and runs over to see a bronze pendant, a coin, a hoard of coins, a massive fragment of limestone vessel, typical of Second Temple period Jewish homes. So these coins were found at El-Araj with the help of an archaeologist's best friend, a metal detector. The limestone piece, says archaeologist Akia Cohn-Taver, fits beautifully with the thesis that they found the first century Jewish village of Bethsaida. And that should send shivers all over you. It bears stressing that the inhabitants, including 3 of Jesus' apostles, Simon Peter, Philip, and Andrew, were Jews, as was Jesus himself. I'm going to skip ahead. It says, sadly, the first season was something of a dud, mostly unearthing Byzantine ruins and Crusader sugar pots. Nice enough, but nothing earth-shattering. But at the end of the second season, they discovered the Roman bathhouse, and that changed everything. It was proof that there was a Roman layer from the time of Jesus, which strongly supported the putative identification of the site as Bethsaida, which had been renamed Julius. News of the bathhouse's discovery made waves in Christian circles. And then it goes off on a tangent on this group of people that are working on it instead of just keeping with the story. So skipping ahead to the important part, in 2022, we found the inscription. In the annals of biblical archaeology, it was an extraordinary find. It explicitly mentions the Apostle Peter in an early church building, according to Gospel, in Simon Peter's hometown. We were assigned a square at the northeast corner of the church and didn't expect much, but began to dig. We went down about 2 feet of dirt. As he swung his pick into the dirt, the volunteer heard the telltale thump of hitting not dirt and thought there was a floor beneath them. There was. He cleared a little and thought he saw writing. The bell rang and everybody rushed over, and there it was, an inscription, though they couldn't tell that immediately. It took days to scrape off the ancient cement, coating it, and read it properly. As the volunteers diligently scraped and scraped and scraped, more letters appeared, spelling words that Notley, a scholar of ancient languages, could read. When the mosaic was more or less clean, the volunteer wrote down the ancient Greek letters. There was one letter that was not very clear, so I left it out, he says. Steve was reading and said, there is a letter missing. I went down again, scraped some more. The missing letter turned out to be Alpha, the first letter of the word apostle in Greek. So what this turned out to be was a Simon Peter inscription after the initial cleaning. The inscription doesn't explicitly name Patros, Peter in Greek, but explicitly appeals to the keeper of the keys, and that, the volunteer confirms, refers to Simon Peter, to whom Jesus promised the keys to heaven. At the museum, you can see the pottery or the mosaics, but they're in a glass case and you can't touch them. Only look at them. At the real site, you can touch it, you can smell it. There's nothing in between. The fire consumed all life above ground in the areas and enabled Aviam and his team to do something they could never do before, survey the naked land around the church at El-Araj. The fire started near Amnon Beach. 11 firefighting teams from Tiberias and the region, aided by 6 planes and all-terrain vehicles from nearby villages, battled the blaze for more than 17 hours before extinguishing the last flames on Shabbat afternoon. And some of this, I think, is repeated. As the archaeologists walked over the carbonized land on the following Sunday, smoke was still rising from isolated hot spots. And that's when it happened. Ruins of ancient homes appeared amid the ash after El-Araj burned. And these small mounds attest to buildings below the scorched earth. If you remember a while back, I did 2 videos. I did an update video about this dig, and I did the initial video when they first started digging. But they had found this inscription that mentioned Simon Peter. And I really believe that the inscription was inferring about Jesus, but they didn't pick up on that. In that video, I talked about it, and I can't remember everything I said about it, but they had unearthed several walls that dated, some of them dated back to the Byzantine era, when this church was built over the house, supposedly, of Simon Peter and Andrew. There was a pilgrim that I read something about in, I think it was the year 725. Don't quote me on that exact date, but he had seen the area, and at that time, it was well known that they had preserved the house of Simon Peter and Andrew there in Bethsaida. He had written in a journal that the house of Simon Peter and Andrew was preserved underneath a Byzantine church. So this was protected all this time, and then the silts of time and the water came up over the site, and periodically does when there's a lot of water. So they've had to move the water back and excavate. Well, now this fire has burned so much foliage that was covering the area that they can now see the structures of the houses that are buried beneath where the foliage had been covering, and they couldn't see anything. So now they're going to be excavating even further into this dig where these houses are, and they have already found fishing weights in abundance in one of the houses. So this is so amazing, and I believe that the Lord is just unveiling things right and left. And wouldn't it be just amazing if they unearth a house, if that isn't the one already that they've already found that's theirs, with the wall that dates to that time period. It was a wall preserved within other walls that surrounded and protected it. So it dated to the time of Jesus. So they assumed that because of the inscription and everything, that this was part of the house of Simon Peter and Andrew. But now with the wildfire that happened there, it unveiled the lost biblical village of Bethsaida. So they can see these mounds now that they couldn't see because of all of the overgrowth of foliage. So who's to say what they won't find next time? And it's really exciting and thrilling. And, they found coins, and they found jars and other ancient relics and artifacts. So I'm just bringing you an update that this wildfire had happened and that it exposed the ancient village of Bethsaida in more detail than they ever could have imagined or found before. So I hope this gives you an exciting thing to think about and ponder. It really thrills me, and I just love stories like this, and I love biblical archaeology. So anyway, sweet dreams. I hope this gives you something to think about and dream about. Thanks for the support of my channel, and God bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. Morning, noon, and night. I'll see you later. This is so exciting. Good night.